Welcome back to our cozy safe space, where we celebrate African identities and share stories that connect us all. Every Wednesday, join us for brand new episodes in English et en français. You can find We Are All Africans on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. Now, take a seat, relax, and listen.
So, what is your full name and what does it mean?
Okay, so my name is Fenny Louise Taylor-Diggs. So I have a very English name. But Fenny, my father went to school in Boston and he had an English professor who took an interest in his life. And she kind of became a mentor. And so he named me after her because of the impact she had on his life. And I'm named Louise after my grandmother, my father's mother. Her name is Louise. So me and all my cousins and sisters are all Louise. Yeah. And then Taylor, that's my last name. Diggs, that's my husband's name that I've carried now. But my mother referred to me as Ya, which is the second daughter in the Mano tribe, because my mom is from Nimba County in Liberia, and they have the Mano, the Gio, the Mandingos are there, and she's from the Mano tribe. And so I'm Ya. I'm the second daughter. And very nicely, my son's name is, his name is Wolakewo, which means the doing of God. Something God has done in the same manner. So even though I have very English names, but my mother was very, it was very important to her that I knew where she was from. And so I identify as a Mano woman in Liberia and not as my father's tribe, because she was the first one to teach me about culture and the importance of it. So I tell people, they say, where are you from in Liberia? I say, I'm from Nimba County. And they say, huh? Taylor? Nimba County? But yes.
What is your father's tribe?
My father, they're Gola. So they're from Bumi County, Montserrado, Bumi. But their lineage is very interesting because they were part of the Congos. So the slaves who returned, they were African Americans, and there were those who returned from the Congo as well. So in Liberia, they call them Congo people. But it's really those who came from Congo. And so his father's father was one of those tracing back, and then they married a Gola woman. So there was the blend between the Congos and the Gola people.
So you're talking about Mano people, Nimba County, Gola people. Where are they? In which part of Africa? Which country?
They're in Liberia. So Liberia is a small country near the Atlantic Ocean, the west. And so Nimba County is in the north, which is neighboring Guinea and Ivory Coast. So if you want to go to Guinea and Ivory Coast, you have to pass through Nimba County. And then Montserrado, which is really big, that's where the capital city is, but they have rural parts. And Attington, that's where my father is from originally, and they're the Gola people. So you will have to pass by where they live to go to Sierra Leone. Yes. So that's where they're from. Liberia.
So now I see why when I told you where my father is from, you were like, wow.
Very close.
Exactly. That's really there, right there, around that. And you said something about your mother. You said she was the first to tell you about your culture and who you are. Can you tell me about your mother?
Oh, Lord. My mother was a energetic woman. And she was a traditional woman. So she was the one who believed in God, but believed in the things she learned. And she would always make a joke and say, I believe in God, he's quite slow. So while he's waiting, I'll do these other things. But she was very traditional. Her name was Ya. She was the second daughter as well. Yes, she was the second daughter. And the one thing I loved about my mother was how unapologetic she was about being Mano. She never wore trousers a day in her life. She never left her house without tying her head. She never wore, regular clothes. It was always Liberian cloth or African cloth. And she took so much pride in that. She was a woman who loved beauty so much. She would always frown at me. You leave your house without tying your hair. You don't wear makeup. You just do yourself anyhow. It was that was our biggest tension, that because she was the type who she would have to dress. She would plan her outfits weeks in advance. It had to be tailored made. She wasn't going to see something and buy it. She had to take it to her tailor, who she had over 40 years. He was the same guy who sewed for her when she used to say when I was slim and now where I am. It's the same person. So their relationship evolved. And so she was very unapologetic. My mother never went to school. My grandfather did not believe that girls should go to school. He said it was a waste of investment because she would eventually get married, and so her brothers did, but she did not. But she was very smart and very passionate. And she said to me, if I had gone to school, I would have made a good politician because she could work her way around people. But she was just this woman who was so full of life and energetic and had so much love. You know, she was the type, every time she visited where she was from in Liberia, Nimba County, she would bring someone. She would bring a child to give them a better opportunity to do this. That's who she was. And I think the one thing, when I think about my mother, I think about the love she gave me, which is the greatest gift I've been given in my life, to be loved so fully and so well and so completely that even though she's not with me anymore in the flesh, I know that love lives within me. And I always tell people she's the reason I didn't go looking for love in the wrong places, because I've been so well loved by her. I knew what it was when someone loves you. I know how you become the very, object of their affection and love. And so, yeah, she was the essence of my being. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You said something, you said the name of your son, so you tell us that your mother, and you said that it's from her language.
Yes.
How come?
Well, she'd always, even when I was doing my master's early on, she always said to me, your first child is going to be a boy. She always knew. She said, and I'm going to name him, and I'm going to give him a godly name. And I'm going to name him Wolakewan because he's going to do great things in this world. And so for me, that was like, okay, I was just like, oh my God, some especially West African mothers and children, she was always, you need to have a child. When are you going to have a child? It was always that. And so when I found out I was pregnant, June 24th, my mother died the following day. And so I knew it was a boy. I knew it was a boy. I knew that was it. And my husband was very excited. He was having a son. Very excited. But I always say to myself that Wolakewan name is the name he had before he became flesh. That was the name. And so when I pray for him, when I write him messages, he's 2 years old, but I do it in advance. I call him Wolakewan because that's his spirit name. That is the name. That's the identity he had way before we knew what he would look like. And so, yes, that's how come.
So you're talking to me about two parents who come from different groups.
Yes.
And that made you.
Yes.
You have this really strong cultural element that your mother gave you.
Yes.
Your mother now.
Yes.
How do you work around that transmission to your son or anyone around you?
Yes. And so, okay, so my husband is Bassa. They're from Grand Bassa County. And so for me, the name Wolakewan stands as an identity of who he is. And when even now that he's young, he sees my mother's picture and he's like, Mama, that's Mama's mama. Mama's mama is in heaven. That's what he says. And so I think for me, more than passing to him the manner or the Bassa, I want to pass on to him to be Liberian and to be proud of what that means and what it is. And so I try to teach him little things like patriotism, which he doesn't get yet, but he's going to come along. And I think in how I raise him, I was telling someone the other day, I was like, if I didn't want to live abroad because I was worried he wouldn't be Liberian enough for me. And so I was like, I want at the very core of who he is to be Liberian, at the very core who he is to be West African before I take him out, maybe someday for him to leave. But it was very important to me that he knew what we valued as a people. He knew how we talked and how we ate and how we lived and who we were. And that was in the soul and depths of who he was, that even if he was to be taken out, he would never forget that. So that's how I moved. After I had him, I went back home because I knew that home would be the place to make me who I wanted him to be.
What does it mean to be Liberian?
Ooh, so I was telling someone that to be, for me, to be Liberian is to be kind. But it's also to be fearless. We're very bold and fearless people. We're the type of people you always know where you stand with us. We're never fake. And we do not tolerate much. Maybe that's why we've had civil wars and all of that. But we're the type of people that when our cup is full, the entire thing will break. Yes. And so to be Liberian is to be hospitable, because they're really good at that, wanting our home to be your home as well. To be Liberian for me is to be a patriot, is to love country above self. At least that's what I got from my father's side. They were big patriots, and really it was about Liberia, about the best, about this. And so I grew up with that. And to be Liberian is to love life. We love life. We enjoy. If we're going out, we go all the way out. If we're having a good time, we have all the best time, you know what I mean? And we're quite creative people in our music, in how we live life. And we're very resilient people as well. After everything we've been through, to see our society and to see people thrive and live in that way and create their own world or comfort they want to live in, we're very resilient people. That's what it means for me to be Liberian. Yeah.
And what does it mean for you to be African?
Ooh. To be African for me, I take a lot of my inspiration being African from a lot of our leaders who were visionaries, who were revolutionaries, that died because of the cause they believe in. And so it means to be rebellion. It means to not accept the forces in the West that tell us who we are. It means that for me to be African, it means I get to create my identity, and it's not dependent on what someone in the West has to say to me, but it's true to who I am, and it's true to my reality. To be African to me is to be bold, to be fearless, to be the best, really. Africa is home. I have so much love for, especially West Africa, which is so close to my heart. Everywhere I go in West Africa, I feel like it's mine. But for me to be African is to not accept the narrative and the history we've been told of who we are, but to really look back beyond when those sailors came along. We existed as a people before they came. And so that's what I look to see how we lived and who we were. And what type of people were we? Because I think we had great systems in place, and they came and dismantled it with all their nonsense. But yeah.
You said something about having your son and going back. Mm-hmm. So where were you when you had your son, and why were you there? What is your journey and history of migration?
Oh, okay. So my migration journey started at the age of 7. My family left Liberia. We went to Nigeria. My uncle was exiled, and so we went there. I lived in Cross River State, Calabar, among the Efik people. It was a beautiful city, really kind people, delicious afang soup that even now I can close my eyes and taste it. I haven't been back since I left. But I lived in Nigeria for almost 9 years. Mm-hmm. 9 years I lived there. I did my primary education and almost my junior secondary education. And then I went back home. I was in the 9th grade when I went back home to Liberia. And imagine I arrived, and I never lost my accent. I knew how to talk. I was like, but it felt very different for me. It felt different. And so I remember going to school and everybody was like, oh, Pa, what are you doing? And I came with my Nigerian accent. Good morning, class. And they were like, excuse us, who is this? Because I had the really thick Nigerian accent for the longest. Eventually it went away and I went back to my Liberian accent. And then I went to the UK for my master's. I was there. It's not really migration, but I was there for a year, for 13 months. And then I went back home. And then when I found out I was pregnant, I went to Manchester. That's why I had my son in Manchester. My husband is a big Manchester United fan. And so he was really adamant his son would be a Manchester fan from birth. Wow. Yeah. So I had I had our son in Manchester. And then I went to the US and I lived in the US for almost 2 years. But the way in which Liberia feeds my soul, no one else does. You know, we have our challenges and our social structures could work better than they are. But of all the places I've been in the US and Europe, and it could never compare to Liberia. And I'd be like, sometimes I go there and there's not really much there, but there's something in the air that makes me feel like me. And I'm more of myself when I'm home than when I'm anywhere else. But then I'm home and I complain. This is not working. The government has to do. I complain and complain. And my husband says, when we leave, even for 1 month, you say you want to come back here, you're here and you're complaining. And I'm like, I have a right to complain. I want a better society is why I complain. But Liberia, my sisters always be like, Fenny, why are you coming back? When I was coming back to Liberia, my sister was so upset. She lives in the US. Why are you going? Your son could have a better education. She was just laying it down how he could have a better life in the US than he did in Liberia. And I said to her, but he wouldn't be Liberian enough for me. He wouldn't know these stories. He wouldn't relate to my childhood. The way I imagine I would raise him would be completely different. And so maybe in a way, she felt I was sacrificing his, development in a sense for identity. And for me, identity is important in life. It's important to know where you're from and who you are and what that means when you sit among people like you, to feel like you belong there. There's nothing like it. So yes, I think I sacrificed that. Not really, because, you can have a good life where you are, but yeah.
So you said not Liberian enough a couple of times, and I would like to see how or what do you see when you see Liberians who were not born there, didn't grow up there, but say that they are Liberians.
I've met a lot of Liberians who did not grow up there. And they go home and there is a disconnect. My mother will always say the child you do not raise, even though it is your child, but the connection would be fractured. It's the same. And so even though they are Liberians, and I think they're Liberians and they've contributed so much to our economy, so much back to the society itself, and they've helped to improve the life of those who are there. So I'm not looking at it first as an us or them. I don't see them that way. But I think there is a disconnect in the soul for that place. The way I will look at Liberia, because I was born and raised, and the way they would, it's very different. And I wanted different for him. I wanted him to feel about that place the way I do. I wanted him to relate. I wanted him to properly speak Liberian English. And, when I was growing up, they were very adamant. There was Liberian English and there was proper English. So I speak both.
Bilingual.
Yes, yeah. But I wanted him to be able to do that and to sit in Liberia and feel how I feel. I wanted that identity for him, I think, more than anything else.
So you spoke about a husband. Mm-hmm. Was it that he had the same vision?
So my husband lived in the US for many years. He went to the US when he was 18. His family left because of the coup. Yes. So he lived in the US. And he lived there for a long, long time. And one day he said to himself, I'm going back home. And he loves Liberia, if not more than I do. You know, he will not give it up. He will not. And he said to me, you know, I can't see myself living anywhere else. We're still negotiating because I might move to some French-speaking African country. But it's his place. He loves it there. It's hard for his business and everything, but he loves it. He loves the country itself. And I think that was maybe where we really bonded, because he did not see it from a place of, I mean, as someone who had lived in America for so long, when he came back, it was very much home. That's why I said, because he was raised there, he was born there till, you know, and raised till he was 15. Then he went to Accra. But his soul could recognize the place, which is very different from everyone else. There was no disconnect in the place for him, because he had lived there. He understood it. He was born there. And so there's a different way your soul interacts with a place when you're born there and you're raised there versus if your parents are from there. So I think, yes, we share that similarity.
Yeah, it's very strong what you're saying about the soul recognizing home, and probably from being born there, the first sounds, the first things that you smell. And I completely relate. My parents are not from the same country. They didn't have me in the same country, but it was clear for them that they were having their children in Africa.
Okay.
That this was clear. This is also why they decided to go to Africa and stay and contribute. And I feel that deep in my soul. That's a thing that I think, yeah, nobody can take this from me. No one can say anything, and I would feel like, oh, I don't know. No. And I think, yeah, you're so right about being so intentional about wanting your child to grow up.
Yes.
With these sounds. Also, the amount of love that you get as a child in this continent.
It's wild. Just, you know, the very first time my son came back, he was running behind a fly, and it made me emotional. I said, he gets to see these things. He gets to pass by a tree and see a fruit. He doesn't have to go in a supermarket to see a fruit. He sees the chicken crows every morning. He wakes up. Ooh, he crows with the chicken. He could never have that life anywhere else but home. And so for me, those are the things that, despite our social services and structure, I prioritize that over that. It is more important to me that he sees the chicken and he's so excited. He runs and the ants will bite all his foot. But he's living, he's thriving, his feet can touch the ground, and you can get that. I could not get that in Nashville.
Or Manchester.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
No. You won't get that. You won't get that. And for me, I was very intentional about it. I want that for him.
So you said something about being maybe interested in living in another country in Africa. Why and where? What do you have in mind?
I was telling someone the other day, I almost applied for the Mo Ibrahim Fellowship so I could live in Abidjan. I want him to be bilingual also. His sisters are. They're bilingual. But I think for me, when I think about, there comes a point, I think, especially since I've had him, what I'm thinking about, I know I love this place that I'm from. But at what point do I put his well-being above there in terms of what I want for him? And, you know, there are things I want for him more than just being Liberian. And if Liberia cannot give those things to him, I would leave. But I would not leave to go abroad. I would leave to go somewhere close.
Another home.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That we could quickly get there. So I think if I had to live outside Liberia, it would be Abidjan now, because it's very close to home. We could quickly go there. He would always be connected. He learns a different language and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, Abidjan's cool. That's where I grew up. So there's something that I want, because you talked about your son, and I can see that you're very intentional about every step in in his education, in his being. But did you ever think about motherhood? Did you have a plan? What did you think before it came?
It wasn't, and I was never one of those who were very, maybe what we call motherly. I was never the nurturing type or the, like I was not like my mom. My mother could walk into a room and make anybody feel like you were her child. I don't have that ability. I think it's a gift. But I was never one to sit and think this is wild. But the thing that I always knew was that I wanted him to grow up in Liberia. That I knew. It was a very clear, way before I even met my husband, way, way before. I knew I wanted him to grow up in Liberia. I knew I wanted him to speak Liberian English and proper English. I knew I wanted that for him. And I think after I had him, I think maybe I was expecting that I would become who my mother was. But I learned motherhood simply amplifies who you are. The person you are is the mother you are. And just how I'm not the most nurturing person. I love him more than anything in this world. But I'm not the type who, oh, my baby. It's never been me. I don't know how to be that. And I think at first I was like, I wonder if I'm going to be a good mom to him. I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not that. But, for me, God is the very center of my life. And so I remember one day I was praying, and I could hear, and it said, all that you are all that he needs to be who I've called him to be. So then I would not feel inadequate. I would not feel like I had to be a different type of mother or, be that way. I could do it. And now I see him because of how independent I am as his mom. He is very independent. He's, and I see him thriving. And so I've learned with motherhood to if anything, it has compelled me to be me. It's the only thing that would work for him to be who he was made to be. And so I no longer have, my friends always ask me, do you miss being pregnant? I don't. Baby, do you miss the baby stage? No, I don't. I'm not the type who's like, I sit and reminisce. I don't reminisce about none of that. I am so over with the breastfeeding. We're moving on. And, my friend was like, what's your best stage? And I say, my favorite stage is the stage he's at. Mm-hmm. And I think that will always be the case for me. If he's 15, that would be my favorite stage. I don't look back and reminisce and be like, I miss the new baby smell. I'm not that person. I don't miss it. I don't even... Do
you remember it? You've moved on.
I've moved on. He's 2 years old. We're moving on.
You're just moving on.
We're progressing. And my friend was like, Fenny, I hope you're not simply moving through. And I'm like, no, it's just who I am. That's who I am as a person. Even as a person, I'm not the type to sit and be like, 5 years ago, this was this. And no. I live within the moment of my life. I live through where I am, and I'm able to sit and embrace all that's happening, so that when I move on to the next stage, I never fully miss the past. I don't sit and be like, I wish. Because I sit with it and I take my time with it, so that when it's gone, it's gone. And I love where I'm going and where I am.
Do you think that all these beliefs that you would be like your mother, it's because she was the model that you admired,
yes,
and she was your mother?
Yes.
So how do you think that we can work together I'm really thinking about, like, whilst you were talking about showing more different type of mothering and motherhoods and
Yeah. No, I think it is important, because I think early on I felt like I was failing. He started school now, but I'm not the mom who, I get up every day and I make his breakfast and I make sure he has food to eat. But I'm not the type who sits and go, maybe I'll make him this, maybe I'll do this. And that was my mom. She was the type who would plan what she wanted for me in advance. She was the type who would, she was, now that I look, I was like, wow. And it never looked like work to her, because that's who she was. And so I always remember, be you. Because if I tried to be anything, it would be work. And I don't want to labor through motherhood. I simply want to be. as I am as a mother. So I think it is important to know that there are moms who cook meals from scratch and they enjoy it. And there are others who don't, who have no desire. They just want you fed. Have you eaten? I think it is important so that women can see different types of mothering and what that is. And if you are the type of mother you do not see, embrace that. You could be an example to someone. And so I think even my sister looks at me and she's like, I love the way you do it with him. I like how you parent him. I don't smuggle him. My goal in life is not to cuddle him through life. And I think for me, I constantly think about the fact that he's going to spend more time being a man than he does a child. So I'm very intentional. I soak all his young stages, but all that I'm pouring into him is for who he would be as a man. That's the goal, for him to be there. So this baby stage and 2, it's wonderful. But, even when I try to discipline him, I want him to. I always tell him, he was looking at me the other day and I said, get down. And he said, no. I said, get down. And he said, no. So I told him, I said, come. I said, in life, you must learn to listen. If you do not listen, you will make mistakes in his too. And my husband goes, Fenny, that's too deep. I said,
that's too deep for a 2-year-old.
I said, it's deep. But these are the stages that they absorb so much of it. I want him to understand listening is very important. Then you can make a decision on if it is right or wrong, but you must listen. If you don't listen, you don't make good decisions. Because then you think you know what you're doing is right. But listen, and then you can better assess, is this a good thing I'm doing or bad? But you must hear first. Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about yourself as a listener?
I think I'm a good listener. In some cases, if I'm interested in what you have to say. But I was a child who was very rebellious. I was and I wouldn't even say rebellious for the sake of it, but I hated injustice. I hated people treating me a certain way. So whatever it was, like my elder sisters, and they would cook and give themselves all the meat and they will not give me. I would be furious. We would literally get into it. And so I made a decision that, in African homes, like the elders get this and this. And I was like, no, like my family, they're like, oh, your elder sister, can I apologize to you? My son will apologize to his sister. He will say sorry to her. So that you grow up learning to, I think if I didn't have a strong spirit, maybe I would not learn how to fight for myself and have opinions. Because it's always like, the second child is always
second to something.
Thank you. But I want to create a different world for my children where, yes, he's older than you, great, and I put more responsibility on him, but you're just as valued. He can say he's sorry to you, and I will say I'm sorry to you as your mother. I think those are the things I want to do differently. My mother will never say sorry. She would say, Mama, people can be vexed with their mom long time. Which means, did you get me? Okay, it means she was saying to me, you're not allowed to be mad at your mother for a long time. That's not something you're allowed to do. Yeah, what else I've said? Mama, people can have patience with their mom. She would say those things to me.
So you get it. You know?
Yes. I knew that she was trying to make her good graces. But, even when she would upset me, I knew all that. I never once doubted that even when she would do things that I did not like, I knew it always came from a place of love. I never doubted that. When she would vex me, I never doubted. I was like, I know she loved me. And I hope my son says that about me, something, that my mother loved me so much that I never questioned a mistake or an error of hers, that maybe she did it against me. No. I knew she was always for me. Always. I never doubted. It
was clear, it was felt.
Yes.
It was there, it was present. Yes. It is present,
yes,
as you said.
Yes.
How about you said something about, I think you said it, in Africa, in families. So what was your family dynamic?
Ooh, my father had so many children. And my father died. My uncle raised me and my cousins. So sometimes people will be like, oh, you have so many sisters. My cousins, I call them sisters. He raised, I think we were almost 15. He raised all his brother's children. And he never raised his own children. His own children never lived with him. We lived with him. And I'm so grateful he did that, because you can imagine if you have so many siblings across it, we would not have been close. I'm so close to my siblings on my father's side than I am from my sibling on my mother's side, because he raised us with that oneness. It was very important to him. He knew that if his brothers were alive, they would take the time to raise their children. So he did it for them. I was raised in a very privileged household. When my uncle was there as president, he was former president of Liberia. But when we went to Nigeria, that's when the difficulties began. That's when life was, it was really hard. There were days that we did not have much to eat. There were days that we had to change schools, and we went through a lot. Yeah, we went from a place of, and you can imagine as a child, you're quite confused as to why the state of your life has changed. And so we went through very difficult times that my elder sisters, who I love in this world, they would not eat so we could eat, because there was not enough. But I think through it all, I never forgot who I was, who he was. And I think my sisters, they shielded me so much from life that I think I grew up very naive as a person, because it was very important to them to keep the younger ones, protected, and we didn't know about all these things. I was in school, I was in the 5th grade, and this kid was like, your father is a warlord. Yeah, I had no idea what it meant in the first thing to be a warlord. What does that mean? What does that mean, warlord? So the school break, I went home and I asked him. I said, they say you're a warlord. And he says to me, Fenny, people have so many things to say about me when they do not know the story. But I want you to remember who you are and how I have raised you. And I never forgot that. There were so many times I was angry at the world and angry at people and what they would say about him. I was a defender of his. I would use so much of my young teenage life I spent defending him and his character and who I knew him to be. And one day my sister said to me, Fenny, I think it was my elder sister, Brenda, we're having a conversation, and she said, baby, it's not your responsibility to defend him. And I was like, huh? If they say this about him, and she said, he gave us the life he did so we could be different. Not so you could use yours defending him. And in a lot of ways, I felt like that was my Independence Day. I was free from defending, because it made me very angry as a person, very, very angry. And I was free from that. It was the day I gained independence and knew that Fenny's life was for Fenny to live. And I was not to pay for the sins of my father. I was entitled to a life of my own. And, till date, people still have many opinions about him. It doesn't change how I see him. It doesn't change the man I know who took time out of his day to sit with us and go over homework. And so I've allowed different versions of who he is to exist, because he could be so many things. But I don't take one version over the other. They simply are. And I hold it. I hold space for all. Because I feel like, you get older and you learn about the different wars and blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah. And you're battling in your mind and you're like, oh my God. Wow. Yes. I went to Sierra Leone the first time and I walked into the museum and I saw his picture. They had guilty 50 years. And I passed. And this guy noticed and he's like, oh, so sorry. And I was like, oh, don't be sorry. Because I was not to pay for his sins. I love him and I always will, you know. But I know that we make decisions in life, and we live with those decisions in life. I'm living with mine, and a decision I've made is to love him, so I live with it.
Yeah, we are multidimensional.
Yes, yeah.
He's one version to you, another version to other people.
Person. Yeah.
This is something very interesting. When I saw your name and your country, I wanted to ask you if you were, but then I thought this is ridiculous because this is a very common name, let's say. But at the same time, somehow I was just, and then I said, you know what? Especially when you agreed to coming to the podcast, I was just thinking, okay, at some point I may ask, but then you brought it yourself.
Yes.
And I think you said so many things that are, you can be multiple things at the same time, and they don't cancel each other.
No, they won't. They cannot, because to cancel it would be a single story. It would be. I think the other day when a while back when Mugabe died, and I wrote an ode to him. He started really well. It's just sometimes they don't finish well. In the fight.
Yes.
Yeah. He started really well. They don't finish well. And I said, he was a great man and he was flawed. And the both can be true. But I think sometimes we want one narrative to reign over the other. Like I used to argue with people, but he was so kind, he was so good, he was so... And people tell me he was this, he was this, he was this. And I got to a place in my life where I'm like, yes, he could be all of that. And the bad and the good, they can live. They can exist and not one ride over the other.
So actually with this history and who you are in Liberian society, how is it to exist within that society? Within, you move along with life, but the history of that place, the contemporary history is very strong. You also talked about profiles of Liberians being out there. So how do you exist? Because you really talking about that when you say people were saying this.
Yes.
And you were trying to.
Yes. I think for me, I live one in knowing who I am. But there are certain spaces I entered where I know he's hated. And I do not take away from their pain. I don't. And there are places I enter, he's loved, and I thrive. Because I love him. But I think Sierra Leone is where it's hard to go. Liberia isn't really, maybe because my circle. But when I went to Sierra Leone and they were like, Fenny Taylor, and this lady started to put it together. And she looked at me. And this is someone who was so excited to see me. I could see it switch in her face. And she was like, wow, how can someone have such a good daughter like this? That's what she said. Wow. And in spaces like that, I let them sit in their reality. It is not my role to tell them about my reality or how I know him to be. I listen to them, but I will not let them allow me pay for his sins. I will not. I will not. I will not be more apologetic than anyone else would be. I will not say, oh, I'm sorry on his behalf. It is not my role. So I say I'm sorry because of what happened, but I'm not any more apologetic than anyone would be when I meet people who were affected by the war, and who lost babies and children. I sympathize, but I don't make an apology on his behalf. It is not my place.
And so how or what do you think about politics? Your mother was saying that she
would have been a politician.
Huh? Yeah, and you remember, I think it's today, I said, you look like a minister. I don't know why.
But I think I always say to myself that if I went into it, it would cost me something, because I'm very radical and very stubborn, and I don't believe in compromise. I don't believe there is a bridge. There is good, there is bad. I don't believe in diplomacy like that. I think we compromise so much of our values and the well-being of our people when we try to be diplomatic with the West in things. So if I went into it, it would have to be because people felt like I had something to give. I would never take the initiative to get into it. Even in school, even though I was not part of any political party, but I was very political. It's who I am. I'm very political. I sit and I read all day about different politics and what's going on. I keep myself informed. So it's a second nature, because that's how he raised us, to care. Politics was important to him because he said it changed lives. It's not, I don't shy away from it. I'm not one of those who don't want to talk about politics or don't want things to be political. They should be. Because especially in places where I'm from, that's what makes the biggest impact in the lives of people, politics. So if I went into it someday, it would be because people felt like...
People brought you there.
Yes, they felt like, okay, you would... But I don't know if I would have the courage to do it, but I tell people, I don't know if I would do it well for them. Because I'm very idealistic and uncompromising in how I live. In politics, there's a lot of compromise. I will not do well there. Or maybe I would thrive and people would say this is what we want, but some days I think about it. Maybe in the next elections I run, maybe.
We're watching.
6 years from now. Let's see. Yeah, maybe I would get sick, because I was writing him a letter, because I write him all the time. And I was like, isn't it such a shame that the least people, they rule us in this country and they're our leaders. They're not a great representation. He said, then you should do something about it. But I don't know. Maybe someday. But I'm not, in the beginning, I was very opposed to it. My husband ran for representative in Liberia. Okay. He did. I didn't vote for him. But he was not my husband at the time. But I did not know him. I could not see me in him. But I told him, I was like, oh, I should have done the research, because I think he would have made a wonderful, wonderful representative. And he said to me, well, I've left it to you now. You're the one who will go. I won't go. Maybe someday I'll be a politician in Liberia. Who knows?
You said so many things in just this sentence. I didn't see me in him because I didn't know him. And you said something about, maybe I would do this if people were... But this is usually what we think a leader should be, right? The people put them there. They don't just decide, I wake up, I'm going to be, it's me.
Yeah.
It's because they believe or they trust, or there is a certain type of energy that we see ourselves, or we think that it's going to happen. We've tried, it didn't. We don't have much energy. And this person, what they say sounds true, and it's going to happen. And yeah, so now you have a couple of people who already believe in you.
Oh yeah, I have people call me the politician, and I'm like, oh Lord. But I'm political whether I like it or not. I'm very, 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 and I don't shy from it. I'm not one of those who don't. I want to make political statements. I want to hold them accountable. I want to be the one to say things that they may find outlandish. I want that.
Fenny, I trust you. You know what you're doing, because there's so many ways to change without being at certain political position and remain political.
Yes.
But I trust you. There is something in you that's really, I think, grounded, and I think we need more radical thinkers, especially on the continent. Yeah. So please continue, and please share more. We need that, really. And whilst you were talking about this profile and how, and politicians and what they, I was just thinking about it. It's felt like when we talked about motherhood, so we have a certain idea of what mothers would be or what they would look like, and you were you, and you being you. And I feel like it's the same for that. We have an idea, a leader, first of all, in a lot of us, in our minds, sometimes it's going to be a man. I mean, if it's African, old man.
Yeah. 82, going for fourth term, that type of stuff.
That type of, and you're like, oh. But then sometimes we never even see ourselves. I am too this, not enough that. We know that these people are also scared, they're unsure, they're doubting, but they're there. And sometimes they're really bad and they're still there and they still want to come back.
Yes.
Whilst others really have visionary ideas and the power to bring people together. Think that, no, I'm not sure. And then I guess the crowd doesn't push enough because we have so many other things that are happening. But I do think that it's very difficult to be a woman, very difficult to be an African woman and not be political.
Yes, it is. The very fabric of who we are is, even in my advocacy work and stuff like that. I'm not one who shies away from making statements. I don't have time for that. The system should work for us. It should. We should hold it accountable that it must work for us. When things are not working in the US, the people protest. They write things. They do all of that. We don't. We just, it's not working. We wait 6 years. Why wait 6 years when you can do it now? Sign the petition. Make the change. Get them out. My patience is very thin with politicians. And they try to tell us, we're going to do this, we're going to be the change, blah, blah, blah. And I always said we have this lawmaker in our country and he just always talk about he's the change. And I said, when change comes, change does not talk and say I am change. You see, and it's change. So if you have to tell me many times you're the change, you're not. Do the work. He's not, there's no change. But they come and say, we're going to be this, light for the blah, blah, blah. So if they're serious about doing the work, they would do it, and we would see the change. Yeah, so they should speak less and do more.
Do more, and change has to be positive, please.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the changes that we see are not
positive. Yeah.
So, I have a question for you. We talked about you being Liberian. We talked about Africa. Was there a moment in your life where you realized that you were African?
A moment if I realized when I was African. I think in Liberia, I always knew I was Liberian. And blah, blah. When I went to the UK, I think that's when I really embraced the identity itself. Because in Liberia, I don't have to be African, I'm Liberian. But I think when I went to the UK to do my master's, that's when Africanness became it was me. Like, if you see me, you've seen us. Like, I felt a responsibility to represent us well, to share who we are well, to educate myself about who we are and our differences. And I think that's also maybe when I became more radical in my beliefs. I read books like Black Radicalism, Kehinde Andrews, changed my life. I'm like, oh my God, look at the pretense in my radicalism when I read that book. But, I made it my duty to really inform myself about Africa and the diversity, yet the oneness that exists. So when I went to the UK, that's when I realized that I was African. And I took that mantle with such great responsibility and how I moved and how I talk. And so I had a thing in the UK, I would never say, in Liberia. I said home, because if you knew me, you had respect for me, you would respect home. So I would always say, back home, back home. I stopped saying Liberia. Because I think the way in which we tell people about where we're from, if you know me and you know who I am and you know how you begin to have if Fenny is from there, then. So I would always refer to it as home. So they knew that was what made me. I was very intentional in the UK. Very, I would never say, even though we had differences, I would never talk about those differences. It was already out there.
Yeah, exactly. That's more.
I wanted to talk about the good, the positive, the ones they did not know, the stories they had not heard, those are the stories I was telling, how different we are, how this, how that. And I remember we had something called the African Union with all the Africans. And, you know, West Africans were quite loud people. And so we would, there were more West Africans, so we would always be the presidents. I said, that's why our democracy, our politics is terrible, because we were always...
What are we president?
But we were, and you know, the first was a Liberian woman. She did it well. They loved her. They loved her so much. They kept her. Said, you see?
This is how it works. Huh? So you want to be there because you know they're going to keep you there.
Thank you. Yeah. So, yes. But I think that's when my African identity was born, really. Or maybe it was enhanced. Maybe it had always been there. But in Liberia, you don't think you're African. Yeah.
What do you love most about being African?
Being Black. I love it. And what that means, I love our history. I love where we come from. I love how resilient we are. I love that. I love that time and time again, through different eras, we have rebelled against these systems and outside powers that have tried to shape our reality. I think I love the rebellion. We will not quit. By now, we should have been quiet and dead people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But we will not. We are relentless. We are very much relentless. And I think for me, I love that. I love when I heard about what was happening in Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso. I was like, I need to be there with my people. This is it. This is what it fed my soul for months. To know that this was change that they wanted, that they started, that it is for them. Whether if they think it is bad or it's good or it ends this way or it doesn't, the fact we made a choice in our own lives, I was applauding that. And I thought ECOWAS would come along.
There's the disconnect that you talked about.
Yeah. But anyways, and I'm so glad that they're making decisions for themselves. I'd rather make my own decision. If I'm wrong, let me be wrong.
It is mine. Decision. It's your life.
Thank you. And so,
agency.
Yes. That's what I love most about being African.
What if you had to tell me what Liberia is in 1 or 2 sentences? What would you say?
1 or 2 sentences. I would say Liberia is a land where the people have not been given all the tools and resources they deserve. Yet, they thrive. Yet, they make things. Yet, they live against odds. They should not be surviving, but they do. That's all.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for trusting me with your story. You're very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.